missed the Mad Men era with the smoking and the 3 martini lunches. By the time I got to advertising, it was Perrier. But then I started eMarketer, as Laurie was saying, and it was focused on digital marketing with particular emphasis on the statistics of what's going on with digital marketing. So those are the 3 careers. Can anyone give me a guess as one word that summarizes or is a common denominator? Anybody?
Audience.
Nice try. Close, but no cigar. The answer is manipulation. Think about it. Advertise or magic? Yep, check. Advertising, manipulation? Oh, I think so. And statistics? Well, we all know what we can do with statistics. So that's the quick prelude to get into this. Why am I here today? Why are you here today? I want more joy and happiness in my life. I don't know about you, but that's pretty much what I think everybody wants. I've spent years researching this, reading it, discussing with friends, and learning what it takes to lead a better, happier life. And finally, I just would like to share it with other people that I've learned spending a lot of time looking at this stuff. This is just a few of the books in terms of my source material. I don't just read these books, I like devour them and then try to look for convergence in the thoughts and the ideas. One of my favorites is this one, 436 Ways to Stop Thinking So Much. Really? That's just a joke. No, that book does not exist. No. Think about it. Think about it. These are some of the teachers. These are people from 500 years ago, people who are still alive today. They're behavioral scientists, economists, theologians, philosophers, clinicians, psychotherapists, etc. And it's what's interesting, again, is the convergence that you start to see. One of my favorites is Phil Stutz. He's a famous psychotherapist to many celebrities, in fact, in Los Angeles, but he's brilliant. I just want to emphasize with everything that we're going to go through, and it's a lot of information, you may want to take notes, but I will be happy to send you a copy of the presentation later. There is no quick and easy fixes. There's no like silver bullet, this will make you happy. No, and it takes constant work and practice, which I'll get to. So what Phil Stutz says is that we sometimes forget that we as humans all face 3 common human realities about the human existence. One is pain. We all experience it, pain and suffering. Then there's uncertainty. None of us really knows what's going on in the future, although we can predict all day long. And everything, I'm sorry, requires constant work. It's like working out in the gym. You can't just go once and say, gee, I'm done for life. I'm healthy. You have to keep working at this stuff or it doesn't really stick. Pain is interesting because it's so universal. And I'll never forget the first quote-unquote self-help book I ever read was Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. Anybody read that? The very first line in the book is what? Life is difficult. So let's move on. What are we going to cover today? What makes, I think, this really maybe a little different from maybe other presentations on happiness is that I like to get into the human brain and neuroscience, how our brains and minds are wired evolutionarily, and how they work for us and sometimes how they work against us. We'll also look at what is happiness? How do we define it? What are the ingredients of happiness? Why is it so elusive? So we'll get into that. And then finally, the key is the 6 pillars for joy and happiness. I've kind of accumulated all the information and packed it down to 6 pillars that I think you will recognize. I'll just say them very briefly here. Acceptance, attention, gratitude, social connection, meaning, and action. And they all work very much together, interrelated. You can't have one with the other. So let's start with the human brain and the mind. Our hard wiring does indeed present us with many challenges. Many of you know are familiar with the amygdala, that little almond-shaped piece of the brain. It's at the base of the brain. It's the oldest part of the brain. It's the major processing center for emotions, anger, fear, sadness, right? The kicker is it's in this emotionally charged amygdala and the related limbic system that we first process any new information or experience. So it gets first dibs. It's the emotional, this emotional part of the brain where we first process things. And this is why we often end up overreacting. Has anybody ever done that here? A few titters, but yes. The prefrontal cortex gets blocked out until it can kind of step in later. But it ends up playing catch-up, as we'll see later. One of the most famous neuroscientists of our day, Bessel van der Kolk, No matter how much insight and understanding we develop, the rational brain is basically impotent to talk the emotional brain out of its reality. Your brain is first and foremost wired for two things: survival and reproduction. I will not be talking about reproduction today, just in case you're worried. We'll just be talking about the threat part, the survival. So it focuses on three things: threat, novelty, and pleasure. I don't have time to get into the novelty and pleasure parts, but I'm sure you can figure out what that looks like. But threat is what is driving us first and foremost. And the question is why? Well, if you go way back, say 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, whenever man began, and he's rummaging through the forest and he looks over there at a tree and he sees a leaf. And on that leaf, it looks like, if I look carefully, there's a bug. But if I'm doing that, I might have missed what happened down here in the meantime. Did anybody see that? If I'm focused on some little thing like that bug, I may miss that there's a lion about to eat me or my loved ones. And that is all about the survival imperative. That's what's hardwired into us. Fear, in other words, keeps us on our toes. Not only yesterday, but unfortunately, it still keeps us on our toes today. So which gets your attention most? Just take a quick look. If you're like most people, or 99%, in this study of 15,000 people, they were drawn to the fearful face. Did anybody have a different response? Okay, yeah, I think every once in a while somebody is looking at the happier face. Yeah. So yesterday's threats, obviously, were maybe a little different from the threats that we have today. If you were around 30,000 years ago, you might have seen a similar. This is basically your saber-toothed tiger we've all heard, right? But today the threats are a little different. The boss gives us a negative review. You miss the train. Your 4-year-old spills milk. I can get really agitated about that. Your husband leaves socks on the floor. Oh my gosh. You're last in line at Starbucks, or kicker. Oh my gosh, Starbucks is out of your favorite drink. Warning, warning, about to shut down. This is what's happened to me. There's a movie about this with Will Ferrell. So our reactions not only affect us, of course. When we're overreacting to silly little things, we affect everybody else around us. And that in turn affects our happiness. The fear of threat, it helps to explain why we have what's called negativity bias. I'm sure you've heard of this. Negative thoughts do tend to overshadow positive ones. Negative feedback has a greater impact than positive feedback. Have you ever had a performance evaluation? You get one thing that you need to work on, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you're arguing about it, and you're getting all excited and upset. Negative impressions are quicker to form than good ones. Again, this is all hardwired. And finally, losses hurt more than gains. You might have read that in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Great book. Negativity bias can be thought of this like this. It's kind of like your brain is a sieve. And you imagine that there's white clouds representing happy thoughts, and there's black clouds that represent the negative thoughts. What happens is all these thoughts go into your brain, it goes through your brain, and what happens is they all accumulate, and the negative thoughts are heavier and stickier, so they stay in your brain, and that kind of gives you that kind of overall orientation that things aren't so good, right? That's what we all suffer from. We also struggle with our attention. On our weight, we have two basic, very broad types of modes or focus, and the first one is the focus mode. We'll get to the other one in a second. The focus mode is things you're probably pretty familiar with. It's very directed, purposeful, intentional thinking. You're working on a problem. You're having a conversation. You're solving a creative problem. You're having an intention about something. There's focus here, right? Typically, it's a positive experience. We talk about getting in the zone or getting in the flow. And then it often leads to actual results. It's productive. It gets you somewhere, right? And finally, within focus mode, we can also start to access our executive control function. Who knew that they even had an executive control function? The way that plays out is we're selecting our attention based on goal relevancy. We can tell our brain what to focus on. As Amishi Jha said, it's a goal-seeking mode that asks for what I want to accomplish right now. How should I orient my attention? She's an expert on attention. She has an entire hour-and-a-half podcast that I listen to. But much of the time, our mind is not focused on anything particular at all. This is what's called default mode, okay? It's basically autopilot. So let's see if you've ever been in default mode. Take a little test here. You ever read a page from a book without registering any of it? Some of us are older. That happens more frequently than we'd like. Walk into a room and you forget what the heck you even went in there for. Find yourself ruminating about problems while in the shower or in the gym. I can do it anywhere, actually. Daydreaming about future plans while listening to a boring lecture. Are you doing that right now? Sorry, mea culpa. Default mode is often not helpful. It's not that bad. We do need, time and space to just ruminate, let our mind wander. It's like taking a dog out to the park and letting it kind of go off the leash and just enjoy him or herself as he or she runs around. But it's often not helpful because a mind-wandering state of being is often not pleasant. If there's rumination, thoughts randomly skip from one topic to another. There's no logic, there's no purpose, there's no direction to it. It just kind of floats around. Often veers into negative territory, anxiety, worries, shoulda, woulda, couldas. This is the stuff that just drives us insane. Matt Killingsworth, back in 2010, did a huge study on this, and he said a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And here's the scariest statistic of all in his entire presentation, which is, he said that we are in our default or wandering mode, mind-wandering mode, 47% of the time. So almost half the time that we're alive, awake, we are mind-wandering. We'll get back to that later, but it gets worse, because then we have what's called attention black holes. These are mental sunk pups that come in 4 concentric layers. And I want you to see if you can relate to this particular kind of sequence of events here. So we're out in the world and there's an original threat. It could be financial, it could be health, it could be relationship, it could be back to Starbucks and there's a big long line and I have a meeting to get to. But the original threat, the thought is, my boss just rejected my proposal. Now that's a fact. The boss just rejected my proposal. We get into rumination mode and we start making suppositions like, I must have made a stupid mistake. Or I think my boss has it in for me. So then some people at this point move to the next level, which is thought suppression. They try to block out the negative thought. They might do that through drugs and alcohol, overeating, or just through pure thought suppression. I'm not going to think about it. And of course, that just makes it worse. It makes you think about it more. And then eventually we can get into imagination. We start catastrophizing, imagining the worst is the most true. Oh my goodness, I'm going to get fired. How did that happen from just he or she rejected my proposal and it had maybe nothing to do with you? He's just busy or something else is going on. So with rumination and imagination, we end up adding to our own suffering. Mark Twain said this best. He said, I have suffered many terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. Attention black holes will clog up your mind and rob you of peace and joy. Because anything that you can imagine in your head, whether it's true or not, your brain interprets it and experiences it as if it actually happened or was real. The mind cares less about what actually is and more about this whole narrative that you're building up in your head and seeing if it's coherent, it makes sense in your brain, even if it's not based on a lot of reality. And then finally, over time, the brain will actually start to rewire itself based on a steady stream of negative thoughts. And those negative thinking loops start to trigger negative emotions, which makes sense. We just start getting into this negative spiral. And none of us, I think, wants to be in that. So let's get to part 2, which is looking at the definitions of happiness, some of the statistics about it, what are the ingredients. But let's start with you. How happy are you today? And we're actually going to do a personal private poll. You don't have to share this with anybody. If you have a piece of paper or you want to type it down in your smartphone, rate your happiness, not just today, this second, this moment, but over like the last 3 or 4 weeks. Would you say you were a 1, I'm just at the end of my rope, I hate my life, to 10, I am ecstatic, I'm euphoric, everything is great in my life, in which case you really don't need to attend the rest of this, you know more than the rest, and we can I'll bow down and take notes from you. So write it down and then think about it maybe a month or 2 later and see where you're going on that trajectory. Are you going up or down? And see if maybe some of the things that I'm going to talk about could actually lead to a slightly happier number. When I first did this about a year ago, I will tell you I was at about 6.2. I was being pretty harsh with myself. 6.2 out of That's just north of neutral. I'm now easily at a 7.4, 7.5, but I'm leaving lots of space to get to 10. So how happy are we in America today? This is a consensus look at a bunch of different studies, percent of Americans who feel they are very or somewhat happy, and the answer is 82%. You might be thinking, wait, that seems a little high there. Well, the caveat here is it includes somewhat. Somewhat is kind of like, meh, I'm not really happy, but I guess I'm happy, right? So let's take a look at it. This is based on a bunch of studies. Again, the 82% are happy. These are the studies that I looked at: Pew, Gallup, Ipsos, NORC/GSS. And as you can see, there's fair amount of tightness in the numbers between 68 and 84. Generally, a majority of us are somewhat happy, all right? According to a bunch of the surveys, if I do the numbers again, I come up with around a third of us that are within that happy, very happy. Okay, I'm not quite there yet, but I'd like to. Then there's not happy, which is 18% of us. The sad news there is the percent who are not happy seems to be moving upwards. In Gallup, from 2004 to 2018, it went up 10 percentage points, the percent not happy. And then NORC/GSS, in their studies from 2018 to just this last year, up another 17.5 points. So in other words, the trajectory is negative in terms of our happiness, at least in America. What are the ingredients for happiness? There's been a ton of studies on this, but this is probably the best landmark study I've seen. It's from Ipsos, the top 5 greatest sources of happiness. This is global data, but they also cut it in the US, and it's pretty similar. What's interesting here is after health, physical well-being, which I'm not going to get into today, that's really not part of this. It's more on the mental stuff. But social connection, the my children relationship with partner comes up very strong. That's important because one of the pillars is social connection. And another one, of course, is meaning. Life has meaning and purpose, which we'll talk about later. And guess what was dead last in terms of sources of happiness? Anybody have a guess?
Money. Job.
Oh, very close. Actually, social media was dead last at 11%. You can go back to Twitter now. And this one that was third to last was material possessions. So I think somebody mentioned something like that. So at least that's what people say. So anybody heard of the smile curve? This is really interesting. Looking at different ages from 20 up to death, right? And what we see is the happiness index, best possible life and worst possible life, goes down from like you're 20 years old to 50, 55. Your happiness continues to go down. You've got a lot of responsibilities, you've got a lot of going on in your life. Maybe you're just not satisfied with a whole bunch of things. And maybe you're on the treadmill, which we'll talk about later. But then happiness around 50, 55, 60, depending on the person, starts to go up. How do we explain that? Well, Robert Waldinger, who's a Harvard psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, says as we get older, we realize that death is a real thing. Rather than making us depressed, it makes us feel like, it makes us put priority higher on our list. We take it more seriously. And I think that's a lesson for anybody at any age to start thinking about this now, taking it more seriously. This just happened today. I literally captured this slide today. This was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and it shows that America has dipped in global happiness ranking from about 18 last year to number 23 in all over the world. So we are behind. Who's number 1, 2, and 3? Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. Don't ask me to explain that, Iceland, but that's what it is. So the pursuit of happiness, as we all know in America, is a basic right. But then there's the question, how do you define it? What is happiness? What is joy? And there's lots of different ways to do it. This is a great take on it. This is from Elizabeth Dunn. She teaches at the University of British Columbia, and she's done a meta-analysis looking at tons of different survey data from all different sources and weeding out the good stuff and the bad stuff. And she basically came up with a 2-pronged approach. One is happiness can be defined emotionally as generally having more positive emotions than negative ones. It doesn't really explain how you get there, right? The second one is called cognitive or evaluative. This is defined as feeling that you're living the kind of life you want to live. In other words, you're living your life according to your sense of meaning and purpose. We'll come back to that later. Then there's Mo Gaudat, who worked at Google. He was the former chief business officer. Spent 7 years constructing an algorithm to get to happiness, right? Of course, he worked at Google. He had to do an algorithm. If you boil it down and take the numbers out for a minute, it's you're happy when life meets your expectations. It kind of goes like this. This is how my life is now, okay? You subtract your expectations for how you think your life should be, and then if the former is less than the latter, you're going to end up being not so happy, okay? I'm now going to show my favorite equation for happiness that I didn't invent myself. This is from Arthur Brooks, very smart guy. He's written a bunch of books. He's doing stuff with Oprah right now. I'm so jealous. Anyway, he says satisfaction or happiness, he defines it as satisfaction, is a numerator divided by a denominator. Let's take a closer look. He says satisfaction equals what you already have. This could be your possessions. This could be your character, your personality traits, your children, your wife, your car, your smartphone. It's everything that you have. Okay, not just possessions, but conceptual stuff as well. Divided by what you don't have, but you want. Think about that. What you don't have, but you want. In other words, what you're desiring. We tend to think of the numerator, what you have, as finite. Within reason, it's like, yes, I could go buy more stuff, but generally what I have is what I have. We'll see why that's not the case later. And if we're not careful, this bottom one becomes infinite. And you can imagine if my numerator is here and my denominator is here, I'm not going to be a very happy person. As Amit Sud, one of the best books I've read on this whole subject matter, says desire exists in abundance. If you satisfy one, another one magically appears. Endless desires plague us. The mind is a desire machine, wanting, always wanting something you don't have. You can satisfy or fix one area in your life, but there's always going to be another one popping right up. Does that relate to anybody? Is it just me? Okay. This leads to the hedonic treadmill of death. One of my favorites is I lived this for years. There's some people who know me well. It kind of goes like this. You're here. Where's your happiness? Oh, it's over there. I'll get to it. It's kind of like I'll be happy when, and then you fill in the blank. I'm seeing some head nod. I like to play it out like this. I am on the hedonic treadmill. And my goal, my milestone, I'll be happy when I get that promotion at work. Well, what happens? You get that promotion at work, whoop, pop the bubbly, have a little toast with your wife or your husband. And then what happens? You get to the new milestone, and then you're deferring happiness later. And if we're not careful, what happens is that we end up deferring happiness until the end of time. It's always another moment. One of my favorites of the philosophers of all time is Blaise Pascal. He was a French mathematician and Christian apologetic, and he wrote really, really smart stuff. 353 years ago, just listen to this. This is talking about the present moment. We almost never think of the present. And if we do think of it, it's only to see what light it throws on our plans for the future. And he said, the present is never our end. The future alone is our end. Thus, we never actually live, but hope to live. And since we're always planning how to be happy, it is inevitable that we should never be so. I had to read that 10 times when I was like 25 and go, what the heck? That feels right. And it's true, there's a bunch of science behind it. This is how we live with a sense of happiness, always being momentarily deferred to some future point in time. So we're kind of trapped between the past, right? The present moments get squeezed out by the past because of all the thoughts of the undigested material, the regrets, the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and so on. And then the future, that the future is always uncertain. I'm always thinking about the next thing. I've been in church literally making slides in my head. I'm not exactly in the present moment. I hate to say that. Okay, so now we get to the meat of this, which is the 6 pillars for joy and happiness. No one of them will make the difference, but a bunch of them together will. Acceptance. Let's get into that. One of my favorites. Acceptance is tough. At the highest level, if we cannot or will not accept the realities of what it means to be human, we're really going to have a tough time with happiness because reality gets in the way. As Stutz says, Phil Stutz, you can see he has a wonderful, it's an hour-and-a-half documentary on Netflix. I watched it so much, I practically memorized it. Again, talks about pain, uncertainty, and constant work plaguing all of us. We all have to deal with this stuff. The quicker we realize we're not alone in these aspects, that it's universal, the quicker we can feel better about our current situation and then start moving on with it. The problem isn't that we have problems. The problem is not that we have problems. It's that we think we shouldn't have problems. Why is this happening to me? It's always me. No, Geoff. It happens to everybody. Everybody has their sink back up. Everybody has their kid who's struggling in school. Everybody has something going on, and we just don't realize it. It also kind of looks like this in terms of acceptance or non-acceptance. Here's a fact. It's not raining today. I think it's supposed to rain later. It's raining. The non-accepting person, I don't like rain. Why is it raining? It's ruining my day. This is not what I wanted. It's driving me crazy. Why is it always raining when I want it to be sunny? What does the other guy say or the other gal say? Yep, it's raining. As Eckhart Tolle, spiritual teacher, says, it's a great way to sum it up. The mental suffering you create is always some form of non-acceptance, right? Some form of unconscious resistance to what is. The intensity of the suffering depends on the degree of resistance to the present. So I'm going to get to a few strategies in each of these pillars. You can just jot these down, or you can get it in the presentation when I send it to you later. Face your pain and suffering head on. Don't duck away from it. Don't try to ignore it. Don't drink your way through it. It's not going to work. As Phil Studd says, ironically, when you face the pain head on, it can start to diminish. It has less power. Neuroscience tells us that when we try to avoid painful emotions, don't let them in, we are also filtering out positive emotions like joy and happiness, right? This is neuroscience, back to Basil van der Kolk. The tragedy is that the price of closing down emotions includes filtering out sources of joy and happiness as well. Acceptance strategies, oh my gosh, this is so hard for me. As anybody who knows me, I can get really impatient. So whether I'm doing my taxes or trying to get somewhere in traffic and I'm late, assembling IKEA furniture, whatever it is, it's taking too long. I had allocated 22 minutes for this and it's already looking like 45 minutes or something. And I then have to go, Geoff, remember the mantra. Things take as long as they take. You can't rush it. It's going to take that long. So just reorient to reality and say, oh, it's taking longer. Is it important? Yes, then continue doing it. Stop beating yourself up. Oh, I drove myself crazy and about 20 other people the other night. My wife and I were out at Broadway's show. It's already late. I like to get to bed at 10. It's already 10:34, and I'm in Manhattan, and I got to get all the way home. And my car is up here, and there's 20 people in line. What do you think? They all have to come out of this theater at the same time. Did you go see the same theater or the same play that I did? And I'm like looking at this car. He has to move all his cars down, move this one out. I'm like, this is friggin' Rubik's Cube. I drove myself insane. My wife was like, I don't know. I have no idea who this person is. I just drove everybody crazy for about 16 minutes. Only 16 minutes was I late. Big whoop. I get worked up just thinking about it. Face the dread of uncertainty head on. This is from David Rossner, also with Harvard, studies anxiety and practices with people. Instead of letting anxiety about something constantly drone on in the background of your mind, it's just worrying away, beating you down, right? He says, lean into it directly and imagine the worst possible scenario, whatever the situation is. Vividly imagine in detail what could happen in the worst situation. 9 times out of 10, what ends up happening is nothing like that. It's nowhere near as bad, but you also chill out a little bit. It helps us deal with the uncertainty, back to the uncertainty. If we face the worst scenario, we don't have this amorphous feeling of dread kind of percolating in the back of our minds. Another way to do it is schedule worry time, but get to that later. Here's a kicker I have to remind myself and the kids all the time. Accept that life isn't fair. Fair to whom? Relative to what? Right? There's always a part of us, each of us, that always wants and demands fairness, especially in the context of other people. Life isn't fair. Well, yeah, it's not. It's never going to be 100% fair. It will never be fair. And stop comparing yourself to others. This is a related thing. We all do this. Social comparison, no good, right? This is, how come he's so rich and I'm not? Her dress is so much prettier than mine. Why does he get all the breaks and I don't, et cetera, et cetera? We all do this in the back of our mind. We don't like to necessarily share that we're thinking these thoughts. But as Mark Twain again said, comparison is the death of joy. Don't do that. We always like to compare upwards too. Well, he has this, she has that. So, do we look at somebody who has way less than us and go, oh, yeah, because they don't have it so bad. Maybe we should do that. How we direct our attention matters. Too often we're in that default mode, 47% of the time. If it's preventing, it's okay, but if it's preventing you from reaching your goals, you're going to find yourself trapped in attention black holes that are going to make you not a happy person. What you're going to realize with this, so much of happiness is just removing the misery that you're putting on yourself. It's not the positive thing so much as removing of the negative. Your mind is incredible because it doesn't just think. It can think about what it wants to think about. And it can focus its attention wherever it wants to. You have a choice, not just every day, every second, possibly every microsecond, to flip where your mind actually goes and what perspective you want to put it on. Attention is the front door to your brain and your mind. So one of the tricks is to start developing, it sounds like a fancy word, a meta-awareness of your attention. Just being aware of what you're aware of, right? Using your executive control mode, which I talked about before, you can start to monitor your mind wandering and seeing if it's leading you off into dangerous or rumination or catastrophizing type situations or mood depressing cul-de-sacs or needless agitation about things that could bloody well wait if you just didn't get agitated about it right now. Or as Amishi Geoff, the expert on attention, said, we need to occasionally check in with our thinking, realize we're getting stuck, and then unhook ourselves from the hell loop that we're in. You can literally reset your mind wandering to be more productive or at least neutral. Meditation and mindfulness, which I'll talk about in a second, help with that. Get into the flow as much as possible. We're all heard of the flow state, right? Where basically it's an intentional focus. You're completely absorbed in something. There's a little bit of challenge to it, but it's not so challenging that it's stressful, right? These are hobbies. These are cooking, going for walks in nature, things that get you in the mood of just being absorbed in something positive, right? So you should probably make a list now of 3 activities that put you in a state of flow, and then literally start doing those things more. For me, it's doing magic. I like presenting, as you can see, and I'm in a flow state. I mean, I am in the present moment right now, and it feels good. Here's a kicker that a lot of people say, Geoff, mindfulness, really? I don't know, that just seems kind of like airy-fairy, but I started doing this about a few years ago. I set a simple goal. I'm just going to do 3 or 5 minutes a day. Just sitting down and not doing anything, which for me is a type A personality, as my wife will tell you, is almost impossible, or it was impossible. And when I first started doing it, my mind went nuts. Like I didn't know there was so much agitation going on in there. And so it kind of clears the mind out. You can focus on breathing or just notice whatever sounds are happening, but not judging it, not getting it all wrapped up in a narrative about it, just letting it pass through. Okay, there's an app that I'll tell you at the end that can help you with that. Also breathing. I have learned that I can reduce stress throughout the day with no effort whatsoever other than a slowing my breathing down and a longer exhale than inhale. That goes right into the nervous system, which tells the brain everything's okay. It actually works. And you can do that with what's called resistance breathing, where it's like you're breathing through a straw. So you go, take a big breath in, and by pursing your lips, the air escaping has to go slower, and it gives me a little high in my head. It's not, maybe as much as certain drugs, but it's cheap and it works. All day long I do this. Like I find myself, getting stressed and go, again. Little stuff. With mindfulness and training, you're basically putting yourself in the driver's seat. You can change the channel. You can turn the volume down. You can kind of put your life back. Practice present moment living. This should be obvious, but be aware. Be available to people. Be attuned. Put your phone down. We all know this stuff, right? It's just, I have to write this down in my journal every single day. Slow down. Life is not a destination, because ultimately your ultimate destination is you're going to die. I don't mean to be bleak about that. I just mean that's the reality. The happier people in the smile are realizing that's it. So I may as well enjoy this life. Slow it down and actually enjoy what's right in front of you. We'll get more to this in a second. Or as Phil Stutt says, meeting goals alone will never make you happy. To be happy, you have to learn to love the process. It doesn't mean you don't meet the goals. It just means that's never going to be the be all and end all. So what we've learned about the pillars so far, you need to accept reality. You need to pay attention and train your attention. And now we're going to focus on my favorite, or one of my favorites, gratitude. It's so easy, folks. It's really great. Valuing what is already here. Research studies consistently show a strong correlation between gratitude and being happier in your life. It's correlated extraordinarily high. Gratitude works at the deepest levels of our brains and our nervous systems and limbic systems. It's basically telling your brain, you're okay. At least for now, you're okay. It fights against that negativity bias, and it can be leveraged across time. Like, what is gratitude for the future? That's hope, right? Whereas Melanie Beattie, who's written so many books, gratitude makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. That's the hope. Remember that happiness equation? It's so simple. You can focus on two things. One is you can try to shrink the denominator, desire less. Don't want everything that you think you should want, right? By putting limits on your desires or reducing your attachments to outcomes, right? You can actually make yourself a little bit happier because you're not dissatisfied, right? Or Socrates says, the secret of happiness, you see, is not found in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less. I love that, but it's a little austere for me, so I like to focus on the top, which is expand what you have, and you can do that through gratitude. You can increase the perceived value of what you already have by just appreciating your spouse, your kids, your clothing, whatever it is around you, your cat, your life situation, something in there has got to be okay, right? There's going to be stuff all over the place that you can look at. And if you do that, you're going to increase your happiness. It's just going to happen, right? This is one of the most easy things to stick in your brain. And it was told to me by a therapist. She says, you want to adopt the colored marbles mindset. Back to the negativity bias. We're all collecting these black marbles, these negative black clouds, these black marbles. They just keep coming out. Bad. You know, what's going on? But if we start paying attention to the things around us that are actually bringing us joy, or that we just notice and stop and look at the flower, and I mean really look at it and pay attention and smell it, we start to get colored marbles. And it tells our brain things are okay. Things are getting better here. The more colored marbles you notice, the more colored marbles start to appear. It becomes a habit, which is great. Whereas Stutt says, every thought you have is going to affect your mood, so choose to focus on the positives, and he calls it getting into a grateful flow. Let's make this jar huge without spending any money, just reorienting your mind. It's very simple. Obvious way to do this is to keep a gratitude journal. I started doing this. I even include happy memories because it gives a smile on my face. And there it is. There's another one, right? It can be either a dedicated gratitude journal, or you can just throw it into your journal. But get one, because it really, talking to yourself can work if you do it positively. You can let your imagination run wild. This is a true story. I was going for root canal a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, I'm imagining the pristine equipment, the gleaming drills that this guy's going to use, and I'm going to see his PhD up on the thing. And this is why I was grateful. All I did was I go, what was it like 100 years ago for the same procedure? That's what it looked like, folks. Imagine, nobody had to hold me down. I was blissfully happy as he drilled away and practically fell asleep. That's gratefulness. A record of resilience. Look back at a challenging period in your life where you had to endure hardships or painful experiences, right? This doesn't sound very happy, but trust me, what you will do is you start to learn your character. You start to learn what you're about. You write down everything that you've endured to remind yourself what you so bravely weathered and how those experiences helped you to grow. So for me, it was the year 2021. It was a sucky year. So what happened for me, I wrote this down. Just writing this down made me go, holy crap, how did I go through that? First of all, I was separated from my wife. We were separated. We're back together, much happier. But that was, I have a smile on my face. Believe me, I'm not happy. And I'm single parenting a very challenging child who has learning difficulties and behavioral issues and impulsivity problems. And I'm doing that while I'm working. Meanwhile, one of my 3 sons is estranged from us. And then there's COVID. And then because of that, I had to quit my job because there was no speaking going on. And I had too much personal stuff to deal with. And then my father passed away in the same year, for goodness sakes. But I'm here to tell you, I have learned so much from that because I learned that I can withstand a hell of a lot and keep going. So it's good to do a record for this, just kind of a recap. Where have I been? That's why it hurt. I see. Social connection, very important. We all know this intuitively. It's correlated to better health, social connection. We're biologically wired to be in tribes, to be connected with each other. And the quality of those connections do matter. Robert Waldinger, psychiatrist at Harvard, we'll see him in a minute. If you're going to do one thing this year to ensure your own health and happiness, find the time to nurture and develop relationships. I'd also add in gratitude, but that's fine. The Harvard study, have anybody heard of this? 85 years it's been going on. Combination of Harvard students and low-income teenage boys in Boston with surveys and medical records. I mean, they do everything to find out what makes for a happier life. And based on all the data, one finding emerged. It was simple as this: strong relationships are what make for a happier life. And the quality of those bonds are correlated to being more fulfilled than wealth, IQ, social class, whatever. Trumps all. Phil Scutts puts it so nicely: your relationships with people are like handholds or anchors for a mountain climber. My wife's a mountain climber. She depends on those anchors, and I depend on other people. Make it a lifelong practice. It's like exercise. You don't do it one and done. You've got to invest in this stuff all the time. Think of it as social fitness. Our social life is like a living system. We have to keep breathing into it. And that means, of course, being vulnerable. You can't move forward without being vulnerable. With vulnerability and the humility of failure, right? You're telling others, I can't do this myself. Back to my record, resilience, right? I can't do this myself. And the world needs to hear that message over and over and over again. We need to constantly hear, this is hard. I'm struggling. This isn't a backpack. This is a boulder on my back, right? Or Matthew Kelly from Resisting Happiness, everyone you ever meet is fighting a hard battle. Life is messy for all of us, so we have to hear that it's okay to have a messy life. You can't make others be vulnerable with their mess, but you can certainly lead by example. What you're seeing on the white picket fence of Joe Smith over there is us. It all looks nice and pretty. Believe me, you lift up the carpet, you're going to see stuff that's making him really suffer. Search for meaning. This is pretty quick. Remember, we were looking at the two-pronged approach to defining happiness, and one of them was cognitive evaluative. Defined is feeling you're living out the kind of life you want to live. So there's 3 kind of domains in which meaning and purpose live. There's our basic understanding, our spirituality, our belief system, why we're all here. It could be different things for different people. Our sense of belonging, of course, that's social connection, one of the pillars. And then there's doing, our work, accomplishments, not just in the job, but outside of it too. So in terms of understanding, be curious and ask questions. My wife and I do this all the time. It just makes for a more meaningful and happier life. Asking, who am I? Why am I here? What are my values? What is the nature of God? And they're never one and done because we can reevaluate these things all the time. A recent Wall Street Journal study said that belief in God is very highly correlated with happiness. I've seen other studies that say the same thing. This is just a compendium of all the big research companies that have come up with data on this, that 4 out of 5, roughly 4 out of 5 Americans believe in some form of God or higher power. So that's working for a bunch of us. Then there's belonging. One of the best ways to connecting with belonging and social connection is just giving your time and attention away to others. It's kind of obvious. Research proves that attending to others makes us feel good, and it helps us get us out of our own heads. I have to remind myself this all the time. So the other day, it's raining. I've got a whole bunch of errands to do, and then there's a Dunkin' Donuts sitting there, and there's a little booth set up with some Girl Scouts with their mothers, and they're selling Girl Scout cookies. Now, I don't need any Girl Scout cookies. I wasn't even going to stop at Dunkin' Donuts, but I see all these people going into Dunkin' Donuts and not stopping off to get some cookies. And they're out sitting out there in the rain with some umbrellas. And I said, how miserable is that? I think I'm just going to go get some cookies. So I parked the car. I walked up. They thought I was going into Dunkin' Donuts, and I turned and I went right to them. And I'm like, we got a customer. And I bought a whole bunch of cookies. You should have seen the mothers. Oh, see, Melissa, look, we're getting business here. And Melissa's like trying to count the pennies, and it's all going great. And I say, well, can I make a donation too? Oh, yes, sir. Yes, you can do that. Oh, well, here. And I gave him some money on top of that. And I got some cookies. And I had a smile on my face for the rest of our day. And I'm sure those girls did too. It's that simple. Just stop and smile at those. Make someone else's day, and it will likely make yours. As Mitch said, the easiest and best way to become happy is to make somebody else happy. I try to do that as much as I can. Pursuing the works that supports your value. I read this entire book. I'll just summarize it by saying meaningful work, whether inside or outside your job. Sometimes you can't have meaningful work in whatever job you have, but you can do it at church, you can do it in the community. It provides a sense of self-worth and gives you that sense of purpose to get up in the morning. You can ask the questions, am I doing what I want to be doing? Am I becoming who I want to become, living out my values, right? And am I living in a way that brings meaning today and will be bringing more meaning for me in the future? Or as Father Matt Lynn, I use this all the time with people searching for their careers or what to do in life. Look in the world where you both give and receive light and love, where it works for you and it works for them. I do that all the time, and I find that it's a win-win that works for everybody. Finally, we're at the end here, taking action. None of this stuff works unless you actually do something about it, folks. Because I found that while reading all this stuff, writing it and thinking about it and talking with other people doesn't really change unless you start to put some action behind it and start to make it not just one time, but start to make it a practice, start to make it a daily habit. So you have to start doing some new things or doing new things differently, and you have to do them regularly enough so, again, you create that kind of habit or momentum. Doing engages the body as well as the mind. It's all connected. The mind and the body are connected. Actions reinforce thinking and attitudes, and they help us to feel like we're living out our values. The best way to encapsulate this idea of action and momentum, again, comes to Phil Stutz. He calls it the string of pearls. I use this all the time in my head. It goes something like this. You think of your life as a string, 0 to whenever you die, and onto which you place these pearls. And each pearl you place on the string represents an action you take. It could be as simple as making your bed in the morning. It could be calling that person that you haven't talked to in a while. It could be stopping and picking up a flower and appreciating. It could be anything. And when you take the action, you imagine placing a pearl on the string. You kind of say to yourself, I'm the person who puts the next pearl on the string. I kind of like to think of it, if I get stuck and I'm like, what do I do with my life? What am I doing right now? I'll just say, what's the next right thing? Do the next right thing. And it clears out the clog of I'm overwhelmed with what I can do. Just do one thing. Just move and move forward. The winner is not the one who makes all the right decisions. The winner is the one who keeps moving forward in faith to put the pearls on that string, one pearl at a time. And if we begin to make those real and even if small changes in accordance with their sense of meaning, we start to give ourselves a concrete reason for hope in ourselves and a sense of trust. Yeah, I got that done. Even if it was a simple thing, I moved the ball forward. Finally, in closing, make at least, I want to encourage you to make at least one new change in your life starting today. Back to Blaise Pascal, the present moment is all we have. Yesterday is gone and tomorrow is not yet here. We have only today. Let us begin. With that, I want to say thank you. And Here are some different resources. I could give you a million. I'm working on a bibliography of this, but it's going to be a big one. The mindfulness thing with meditation, 10% happier. It's taken off. It's super easy. 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes a day, whatever it is. They've got podcasts. They've got meditations. Just get you out of your head for a minute. Read this book. It's the underpinnings of a lot of the physiological stuff that we were talking about. And then finally, invest in an hour and a half watching this. This guy will summarize so much of what I discussed. So thank you. I think we have time for a question or two. And I really appreciate everybody coming out. Appreciate it. Thanks.
I just want to say that was amazing. And, you know, just everyone goes through suffering and stress and everything else. And like the meditation part, I meditate in the morning. There's apps that help you calm out and do that. And it's 100% right. You're right on. And I thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you for confirming that or validating it. I appreciate it. Questions or observations? Yes, in the back.
There's a lot of things you could do simultaneously. Maybe some help you better others. Like I'm just wondering if there's a board, like you start with first breathing, then you can learn to meditate, and so on.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. I would probably want to preface it by saying, don't just say, okay, I have to meditate for 30 minutes every single day, but set a relatively small goal or just start it on a breathing practice. And then I find that it works better if you build it up. Yes.
I was lucky when I was in junior in college, my new professor was retiring to uterine cancer. And she told us all, last class, she said, nobody else can make you happy. Only you can make yourself happy. You have to decide to be, just like
that's a great message.
It's like, you can't say, I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I have a child. I'll be happy when such and such. I get a new car. Oh, you have to be happy now because that's all you got.
That's right. Yeah. The present moment is all we have. Yeah. We can think about the past. We can ponder about the future, but the present moment's really, that's the if you think about every present moment builds up to this is your life. So what you do with that present moment matters and how you appreciate it.
We have a comment from our older adult center because they've been watching.
I see. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even realize.
I like the stories of personal foibles. I can sort of relate to that. And paradoxically, it makes the suggestions on making improvements seem more achievable.
That's great. Any other observations, questions? Yes.
There was one point where worry time and thinking about the worst case scenario was helpful, but before that, it said if you think about stuff like that, it's going to seem real in your brain.
Yes.
I wasn't really sure about it.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I forgot to say at the very beginning, I don't have a PhD, but I can answer that question. It's the mindset and the intention around what you do that. So you don't want to go around all day long thinking the worst is the most true. The way it's going to go terrible. My date's going to dump me. I mean, if we did that all day long, we would drive ourselves crazy. What he is saying, that David Ruskin is saying, if there's a particular anxiety that you have about something, sometimes, and it keeps plaguing you day after day, it's a recurring theme, sometimes it helps to sit down, and sometimes with a therapist, because if it's heavy, you may need help, or a good friend, and just imagine the scenario to take some of the juice out of it, because your mind starts imagining over the top of the threat, and it becomes bigger and bigger. The schedule, the worry time thing, I've actually done that. Is that when there's something that's just plaguing me and it's not going to go away tomorrow, it's not going to go away 3 months from now, but it's still plaguing me, I can create a time in my schedule for 10 or 20 minutes a day or every other day where all I do is worry about that thing, and I creatively think, how can I deal with it, wrestle with it, what are the feelings I have about it, how do I feel about those feelings, and then stop. Time's up. That's it. Then you can tell yourself, no, I don't need to worry about this now. I have another appointment tomorrow. It's like seeing a shrink, but it's like with yourself. So I don't know if that helps. Yes.
But just on this topic, because that was so interesting, so I was with my husband in the car today, and my mom had a scary, I think, with her lung, we thought maybe she had pulmonary fibrosis. My husband asked, why did you go there when you didn't know the answer? And we had this talk, and I said, I needed to go there. One of the things was I needed to, if she had this, it's very serious, she would die, in the next 2 years. But I said, it also got me to action. So I worried about it, and then I called the doctor, and it turned out she didn't, but it was concentrated. But it was so interesting, because he didn't understand. He goes, why would you worry? And so it was an interesting, when you
This
just
is
said
what,
that.
there's another book coming out from some professor at NYU that also supports this, David Rossiter, that I mentioned before from Harvard, also talks about this. Anxiety is absolutely universal. We all have it. We shouldn't be thinking, oh, anxiety is bad, I shouldn't have it. No, it actually can instruct us, oh, there's something that we may need to take care of. Now, sometimes there isn't, but in that case, taking an action item can relieve the anxiety, right? We are in an absolute anxiety kind of epidemic right now, also loneliness. But that's one of the reasons why I want to get this thing moving, because so many people are anxious, and the theory is it's because we don't think we should be anxious. It's kind of like the problem is that we have problems. The problem is that we think we shouldn't have problems. We shouldn't have anxiety. No, every human has anxiety. It's what we do with it and how we manage it that counts. And I'm not a PhD in psychotherapy, but it's just containing it.
Well, it's just good for me to hear, because it was just what we were talking about, and that, when you said that, I was like, oh, can't wait to go tell my husband.
So you were right. Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I'm on my journey of happiness, and I'm so glad that I could share a little bit of it with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. Thank you all for coming. A few housekeeping notes. PSS is a nonprofit, and we're funded by the City of New York and the State of New York's Aging Office. And the way that we get funded is by having people show up for events like this. So in front of you at your table is a sign-in sheet. Could you please put your name and your email address? And if you would like to be on our email list for future events, indicate yes or no. Either way, you're going to get a follow-up survey if you were here to help Geoff as he develops this program. And I look forward to seeing you at some more events. And if any of you have something you'd love to talk about, like I said, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to host you, and we could do it here. And have a great day. Be happy.
International Happiness Day.
And spring. And the first day of spring.
What's that?
It's the first day of spring.
Oh, that's true. Another reason.